Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. A heap of our Patreon members have asked a heap of questions, so we're going to answer them in this Patreon exclusive Q&A that everyone can watch, including our Patreon members.
Sounds good.
Let's get into it. First question, Steve, not sure if I asked before, but I'll ask anyway. You can do that. I was wondering if you could do motherboard RGB demos as B-roll when doing your motherboard reviews. Like just turn the board on in the dark or a dim room to show what it looks like at stock settings. Well, I don't really review motherboards, so I don't really know when we would do that. I do motherboard varium thermal testing, look at RGB effects. It's kind of off topic on that one. But yeah, I don't really review motherboards. There's probably other reviewers that do review motherboards that maybe focus on that kind of thing. But yeah, sorry, that's not really something we do. Next one. Here's one I stumbled upon. Did Intel themselves make Zen 2 such a winner product? Did AMD work on Zen 2 expecting to compete with Intel's 10nm products and Intel under-delivered? What do you reckon, Tim?
It's a really interesting question. Very, very good question. I don't think you can give any credit to Intel for AMD making Zen 2. They made the product themselves and they made it quite good.
Yeah.
You can sort of think, maybe AMD would have been projecting Zen 2 to compete with a 10nm part, but at the same time, back when AMD was developing the original Zen, they were dealing with quad-core Intel CPUs, and really, it was that competition that led to Intel finally having to get off their ass and start producing above quad-core CPUs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sure, they might have had to be dealing with 10nm, but instead of dealing with 10nm chips, they had to deal with Intel's own, the things that they managed to achieve. They've hit very high clock speeds on 14nm, which, people make fun of the 14nm++, but it's still quite impressive that they were able to get 5 gigahertz out of an 8-core CPU. So, Intel has done some things. AMD's responded and been competitive, and, Intel will come back with 10nm and it'll all be very interesting. But I think that, if you're going to give credit to someone, you can't give credit to Intel for AMD's own products. AMD's done the work. And when Intel comes out with their 10nm stuff and AMD comes out with Zen 3 or whatever, there'll be more competition there again. So, yeah.
Yep, fair enough. Now, here's an interesting one. Steve and Tim, how often, if at all, do you have the need of sharing NDA information about upcoming products you review because you're just so excited about the performance? Well, what are you laughing at? I was going to say, I would say historically not that often, but as things recently have gotten very interesting, and I think it's probably more so because of our Patreon Discord, that before we did the Patreon Discord thing, it was very different. Like, we didn't touch base and we didn't interact as much with you guys. So it was like, in the comments here and there, but it was more sort of comment and leave kind of thing, whereas it's an actual conversation in Discord. And for me, sitting and watching everyone speculating, guessing, and even making assumptions on how the Ryzen 3000 series would stack up against Intel's Core i7 and Core i9 processors in games, and me having the exact answer and the results there, like almost a week in advance, that was that was pretty hard to bite my tongue on that one.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Because right before the launch of the reviews, just like a few hours before, I asked all of our Patreon members what they were expecting the performance to be, and I was just sitting there reading the comments, and a lot of people were expecting, especially for gaming, the CPUs to perform a bit better than they ended up doing. That was all very interesting, but I never really had the incentive or thought to share NDA information.
Obviously you weren't going.
We're not going to share NDA information, but it's interesting when you guys come and speculate, and we sort of already know the answers. It's fun.
Next question, if LTT, so Linus Tech Tips, ever asked you guys to do a Scrapyard Wars season with them, would you accept? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd have to fly to Canada, so that would be
fun.
We have to fit that in our schedule somehow.
Yeah, there'd be no content on the channel for a little bit.
I'd love to do it, but
it'd be fun.
Yeah, we all have schedules to deal with and stuff like that.
Yeah, depends on a few things, but we certainly don't oppose the idea. And we met Luke at Computex this year. We spent like half a day with him. Super nice guy. We had a lot of fun with him. I think we both said to the Patreon members on the live stream 2 months ago, it was the highlight of the show for us, was catching up with Luke. So, yeah, it'd be nice to do something with those guys.
All right. Did you ever consider testing the performance impact / difference between 16.9 and 21.9, and if additional cores would be beneficial in that scenario? Maybe testing, 4 GHz 2600 versus 4 GHz 2700, so the basic difference would just be core count. I don't really see how the aspect ratio would affect how many cores you would need from the CPU. So that's pretty much that. I don't think that testing would be all that insightful. It's probably it on that one.
Yeah, no, that's it on that one.
All right. Do you think there will be more uses for gamers / non-power users on the desktop for USB 3 Gen 2 or whatever ridiculous new name it got a few months ago, and or PCIe 4.0 over the next few years? And if so, what? Would there be any value over time to getting more expensive motherboards with more of these features for someone who keeps their CPU around for 5 to 6 years?
I don't really think so.
Yeah, I wouldn't have. I mean, PCIe 4.0, even PCIe 3.0 isn't super important unless you have like a really high-end PCIe NVMe SSD.
It becomes important once it's mainstream.
Yeah.
So until then, you don't really need to worry about it. It's just it's an enthusiast-based... So I think no.
Yeah, I think. And for USB 3, how many peripherals out there actually support the highest end USB spec at any one time?
Even finding a card reader that actually genuinely uses the highest spec is so difficult.
It just doesn't exist.
Tim, what's the latest on proper 1000 plus nit 10-bit color 4K HDR in FreeSync / G-Sync compatible monitors? Tell us, Tim.
What's the latest? Not much. It seems like G-Sync Ultimate's kind of dominating that at the moment. I think the reason for that is Nvidia has done a bit of work with the panel manufacturers to get the sort of backlights for those monitors, working well. That's at least what Asus was telling me with their products. They're sort of working with Nvidia on that, so you think there'd be some sort of exclusive thing going on there, at least a little bit. I hope it happens, but yeah, not much happening on that front at the moment, at least in gaming. For creators, there's a few monitors, but not really for gaming.
Next one. Steve Tim, do you ever just kind of get up and walk around or dance a bit while waiting for the benchmark to finish running, or when you're waiting for the computer to finish with anything really? What about you, Tim? Are you a big old between benchmark dancer?
Oh, so much dancing. I just get up and party down.
I knew it. Tim will be like, if he gets a couple of seconds, he puts a few Lego bricks in place.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
No, I'm pretty much going at it. Well, usually if I've got some sort of testing that takes quite a bit of time, I'm either doing some research and scripting in that time, or I'm benchmarking productivity on that system, and maybe I'm doing some GPU benchmarks on that one. And like the GPU benchmark stuff's super labor intensive because you're constantly manually doing passes and whatnot. So no dancing, sorry. Okay, bit of a long question here from Crispy, so I might summarize parts of it. So he says he has an overclocked 8600K at 5 gigahertz with a voltage offset. His overclock is stable with a 200 megahertz AVX offset, so that'd be a negative 200 megahertz offset. But it's not Prime 95 stable without the offset. However, it works fine for gaming and everything. No crashing and whatnot. His question is there any disadvantage or danger to not having the AVX offset for day-to-day use, even though it's stable under high AVX loads, or even though it's unstable under high AVX loads, which I do not use? Well, it's one of those things, like if you're not using AVX, it doesn't matter. But then if you run a game that does make heavy use of AVX or an application, then you risk crashing and then having to deal with whatever fallout you suffer from crashing. So there's no disadvantage to setting a negative AVX offset. So just do that. because if
Yep.
you're not using AVX, you're not going to incur any performance penalty, and then if you do happen to use AVX, you're not going to crash. So, makes sense to you?
Yep.
Cool.
Joey asks, you guys seem to be pretty in sync when it comes to opinions on tech, but surely there must be some things you absolutely do not agree on.
This is a funny one because Tim, well, how long have you been doing on the channel for now? A year and a half?
Something like that.
And we've sort of been chatting regularly for about 2 years now.
Yep.
And so we've done 2 Computex trips together, which is basically living in the same room for a whole week together. So that can be an interesting experiment. And it's gone well both times. Like, we haven't really got annoyed with each other at any point. It's just gone smoothly. So that's been nice. It's always good when you work with someone and you don't sort of, butt heads on things a lot. And we were kind of talking, we weren't really talking about this exactly, but I remember when we were leaving for the airport and we sort of were like, well, that's another Computex year in the bag. It went well. It was all smooth. We didn't kill each other. So that's nice. And we were talking about stuff like that. And we both kind of see eye to eye on a lot of things, like when neither of us are religious. We're not anti-religion or against it at all. We just, I don't know. What would you say? We just don't...
We just don't really care about it too much. Not something we think about.
Yeah, we don't discuss it or think about it. If a friend or someone happens to be heavily religious, that's fine. Don't try and make us join your church or whatever it may be. But we're happy for you to believe whatever you believe. And we're not political at all. Like, we both don't have any time for politics or care less and just find it a waste of time. So we don't...
I think those are the 2 things that a lot of people disagree on the most in life.
Well, that's what we were talking about. We're saying most people seem to disagree over that sort of stuff, and both of us are like, don't care. If you have your opinions, keep them yourself. Don't really want to talk about it. Not
Pretty
for
much.
any other reason that just doesn't interest us. So on those kind of personal things, we see eye to eye because we don't care. So that makes that easy. As far as, like, we're very different people outside of tech. Like, I like outdoorsy stuff and all that, and Tim sort of says he prefers sort of indoors kind of activities. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
So, and we both like facts and figures and sort of logical thinking. So there's no sort of, like, arguments based on feelings. We're not into, like, speculation or conspiracies. So we're not arguing over things that you can't really prove. So... yeah, it doesn't really leave a lot of room for having unnecessary arguments.
Yeah,
That's fair.
If you got the facts are the facts,
Yeah. Occasionally we'll have, like, we've occasionally had, like, stupidly long conversations where it's like, I'm not arguing with you, but we want to try and work it out. Like, we talked about I remember we had a long discussion about VRM thermals and how important even VRMs are and stuff like that. And Tim wasn't really taking one stance, the other was just questioning it. And so we had, like, a 2-hour discussion about that, and it was kind of interesting. But, yeah, what do we disagree on? Or
I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head that we significantly disagree on.
yeah, so, I mean, we've spent a fair bit of time with each other over the last 2 years. But we mostly focus on the job, really.
Yeah, pretty much. Get the content out, make sure our numbers are good, that sort of stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So... if anything comes up, we'll keep you updated.
Cat's Custom PCs asks, do you think SLI NVLink Crossfire will pick up in popularity again, or is it destined to slowly disappear? And why do you think dual GPU cards like the 295 X2 and Titan Z aren't really around anymore? It seems like a logical step forward for squeezing the maximum power out of a generation before subsequent die shrinks. Yeah, it's just not coming back. It's just, it's dead. It's either... with DirectX 11, it either doesn't work very well in a lot of titles, or with DirectX 12, it's too time consuming for developers to work.
Yes, yeah.
So I think we'll see dual die GPUs at some point, like the chiplet type thing. I'm sure we'll see that, but that will be all controlled by very, very low level type stuff. Dual GPU cards, though, they're dead. Yeah,
so I'm not sure if Cat's Custom PCs understands this. If you do, then sorry, but the 295 X2 or the Titan Z, for example, they're no different. They still rely on either support by the developer or the driver or both. So they're no different to having 2 separate graphics cards. They're just 2 graphics cards on the one card. but they still require that support to work. So without it, they're just only one GPU will be active, or it'll be basically broken. So that's why you don't see those cards, because for most circumstances, they don't make sense.
Sal Kagan asks, with the big wave of reviews coming to an end, what are you guys looking forward to for the rest of the year? Oh, I think there's still a few more reviews coming, isn't there?
There is, but I'm going to sound like an AMD fanboy if I say which ones I'm looking forward to, because obviously I'm probably most pumped for Threadripper. Personal reasons, my editing rig. I can't wait to upgrade my editing rig. So for me personally, Threadripper, really excited to see what that brings. Of course, we have the custom Navi OIB cards. They should be pretty good.
Yep.
And then we have the 16-core Ryzen 3950X. And that'll also be fun to check out. Nothing too crazy there. It's just got a few extra cores than the 3900X, so we know what to expect there. But that is very much an all AMD answer.
Well, I don't have an AMD answer for you. I'm interested to see
thank you. Intel
10 nanometer. It's apparently coming this year for laptop chips. I know a lot of people don't get super excited about laptops, but
that's why I didn't say anything.
I think we will learn a lot from what 10 nanometer does on the laptop chips that will tell us about where the direction is going for desktops.
Fair. Yep.
So I think it'll be very interesting to see what those chips are like when they launch.
I'll be looking forward to reading your coverage. All right, I'll quickly cover this one. Have you ever considered for a CPU review that you test it with different GPUs to show at what point someone can expect to hit a frame cap? So I won't read any more of that. So he's talking about a CPU scaling type content piece, and I did quite a lot of those with like around the what was it, the G4560 timeline. Yep. But I've done them since. They're really interesting content pieces, and I absolutely plan on doing one of those with the Ryzen 3000 series soon. Hopefully soon. That's the best I can promise. But yeah, I do plan on doing one of those. So here's an interesting question. I get asked questions to this effect quite a bit, so we'll read it out first. I want to get an RX 5700 XT. They are for once going to be a reasonable price in my location compared to other AMD GPUs. But right now I only have an old PCIe 2.0 motherboard with an FX 6300. Probably shouldn't have laughed at that.
Your blood's boiling at this point, isn't it?
I laughed at Don't hate me. I plan on upgrading it. That's fine. It's fine to have an FX CPU. What I want to know is, will the 5700 XT work on an older PCIe 2.0 board while I scrounge up savings for a new platform upgrade? Yes, it will work. I don't actually think it'll be too much slower in most circumstances, but I'm always torn when I read these comments, because I feel like when you're on a really tight budget, and I've been there myself, like I've built plenty of computers when I had basically no money to do so, and I've always found rather than getting like one component that you really want, like a 5700 XT, you're much better off just compromising and getting everything at once, or at least much closer than stretching it out over a long period of time. So if I was in your shoes, I would absolutely get something like a Radeon RX 570. Bloody hell, these 5700. A Radeon RX 570 or 580, because they're much cheaper. They're less than half the price of the 5700 XT. And really, once you tweak a few settings and stuff like that, you're not going to notice too much difference, especially if you're sort of on a budget here. You're not looking for the best of the best. So for the price you can get a 5700 XT for, you can run out and you can get something like a Ryzen 5 2600, which is going to be a massive CPU upgrade for you. You could get that. You could get an RX 570. You could probably even squeeze like a reasonable B450 motherboard in there. And already, just for the money you're going to dump on that, you've kind of got yourself pretty close to a new computer. Chuck some DDR4 memory in there and you're just about away. So that's what I would do. You reckon that's fair?
Yep, that's good advice. Steve, would it be accurate to say that you are like the Steve Irwin of computers?
Crikey! I don't even know what that means. What are you?
I've got no idea. As long as I'm not Bindi Irwin, then we're doing all right.
Oh, God.
She got married recently. So that popped up as like to make you feel old. Bindi Irwin is now married or engaged or something. I was like, what the hell? Anyway, there's your Bindi Irwin facts.
Oh, it's going to take me a few minutes to recover from that. Just about crying. So we recently touched on this type of question in Patreon Q&A. Patreon live stream.
Yep.
Don't even know how it came up, but anyway, we'll quickly touch on it here because we had a good conversation about it. Some say that high clocked speed Intel CPUs give a smoother desktop experience than Ryzen CPUs. In your opinion, is that true? And if so, does Ryzen 2 improve on this, or the Ryzen 3000 series Zen 2? So basically the question is, are Intel's CPUs snappier? So it makes sense that they would be over your first and second gen because they are there's significantly lower latencies when accessing the caches, when accessing DRAM, core-to-core communication, which is same sort of thing, and they're clocked higher. So it would make sense that if Tim was able to set up some kind of, latency test for input test, basically, that they would be a little bit faster. How often, or if at all, you'll be able to perceive those nanosecond differences? Well, I don't know. It depends on how much the CPU is being asked to do. But personally, I don't read too much into it because when you're editing a video, so I've had this discussion a few times with a few people, if you're editing a video and the Intel CPU is slightly snappier for the editing process. So over the course of an hour, how much time does a nanosecond here and there add up to? I would have said stuff all. But then when you go to render out, encode your video, how much faster is, say, an 8-core CPU opposed to a 6-core CPU? If it's going to save you 5-10 minutes of encoding time, that to me seems much more significant than the nanoseconds of maybe perceivable input delay that you notice when editing. So yeah, I don't think it's something that you have to worry about. Zen 2 has definitely improved upon that anyway, and you'd have to be superhuman, I would say, now to be able to tell the difference between Zen 2 and the latest Intel CPUs. Yeah, nice. And then, to a similar effect, we have a question that says, I own a 6700K, a 9700K, and a 2950X. I noticed that my Intel systems seem more snappy, responsive, smooth, faster in basic Windows navigation tasks over my 2950X. That's with a fresh Windows install. Any idea on why that may be? Well, assuming that the storage device is the same, and you've got reasonable spec memory on the 2950X, again, it's just down to clock speed. The 2950X is probably a pretty bad example there. I'd expect a 2700X to do a little bit better in those tests. Perhaps Windows kind of bounces things all over the place with the 2950X, or at least it did. So yeah, if it's really noticeable, then I'd say there's probably something wrong. But if it's like you get a bit of a hunch that maybe it's a bit faster, then yeah, you're probably right. It probably is at times, especially with something like a 9700K. But yeah, open up Premiere and make a 20-minute 4K video and then hit encode, and you'll definitely notice which one's slower there. So it depends on what you're after, really. All right, next question. For higher-end Ryzens, although any given single core can boost to around 4.4 to 4.6 GHz, the all-core boost seems limited to 4.2 GHz, but consistently only on water cooling. Is heat the limiting factor on multi-core boosts beyond 4.2 GHz or something else? Do you think AMD made a mistake making single-core boost when their immediate competitor consistently hits single-core boosts on all cores?
So the last part is Intel does not hit their single core boost on all cores. The 9900K, for example, is advertised as having a 5 GHz maximum turbo overclock, which is of course means single core, but it only hits 4.7 GHz on all the cores. That was
so MCE would do that all the time if you had that enabled.
Yeah, I believe it. So yeah, basically, for some reason with this AMD generation of launches, people are sort of confusing that 4.6 GHz to mean that's the maximum boost it will do on all the cores, and thinking that that's what Intel did. But actually Intel hasn't done that.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
They have the exact same fall off where they can achieve a lot higher clocks on one core compared to the rest. As to why there's the limit of only 4.2 gigahertz for that sort of thing, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a heat issue. It's just, your standard silicon limits, how much power they can get into the silicon.
Yeah.
Because obviously powering one core or thread, is much easier to do than powering all those cores simultaneously with the same power delivery pins. And then, you just get silicon limits with that sort of thing. So
I think the confusion is you can overclock something like the 1900K to 5 gigahertz on all cores.
Yes,
you can, but you can't overclock the Ryzen CPU to 4.4 or even 4.6 gigahertz on all cores. That's the problem. I mean, 4.4 maybe. 4.6 you're definitely not doing without liquid nitrogen or something in extreme voltages. So that's the problem.
Yeah, and that's just simply, as we're saying, because of power-related stuff, maybe Intel CPUs have a better power delivery system. They can get more power into the cores to run them all at those high frequencies at the same time. Whereas AMD, might manage their power a bit differently. It's just there's a lot of reasons why that would be a limit, and it's just the way it is.
Yep. All right, next one here is I play competitive shooters, high refresh rate, high FPS, mainly CPU bound. So that's obviously gaming. However, my GPU is still the main heat-producing part of my system, which can be an issue because my case doesn't have the best airflow. Is there any merit to undervolting the GPU? Would that affect performance even while CPU limited? Would it reduce temperatures at the same FPS? Okay, so if you are CPU limited, reducing your GPU performance by whatever reasonable margin before you become GPU limited, you can certainly do that. So that's fine. It will depend on the games you're playing. Reducing the voltage will absolutely reduce your temperatures. That's fair to say. The thing with undervolting is, and why we don't push it a lot on the channel, is because it's no different to overclocking. So that is to say your mileage will vary. Some cards undervolt like absolute champions. It's really a silicon quality thing. And then others, you take a little bit of voltage out of it and it's just completely unstable. So they're shipped to a spec, and some higher quality ones can go above the spec, and the lower quality ones are pretty well within that spec. So yeah, you can definitely undervolt your GPU to reduce the temperatures. How much it'll help, don't know. Best to just do it. Like, you're not going to damage it or whatever. Worst case, it'll crash and you'll have to load back into Windows. Here's an interesting question. Steve Tim, in a recent video, Steve mentioned you'd spent over $1,000 dues on Ryzen CPUs. There, some of them. Do your videos that cover these get anywhere near covering your costs? So, do we get our return on our investment, basically? Yeah, for those videos we absolutely did, which was nice. You never know going into it, but those videos got around 200,000 views, which unfortunately isn't normal for our channel. So yeah, we made our money back on those because they were only like, I think they were around $300, $350 Aussie each, those CPUs. And we did multiple content pieces. So yeah, we were able to recover our money. That doesn't always happen, but it's sort of like you win some, you lose some. But that's where you guys, our Patreons, help us out a lot because we don't have to worry about taking that risk. We can just buy it. And if the content pays off, it does. If not, well, you guys got some high quality content, hopefully. So anything else to add to that?
Nope, all good. Okay, Scooby Dooby asks, is Navi AMD's Ryzen answer to Nvidia? It addresses a huge drawback of GCN, teraflop efficiency. I, for one, am very optimistic on how well it will scale to bigger chips, even if they have to scale the clocks down a bit to eke out some more performance per watt. Yeah, it does seem like it's at least getting to answering Nvidia. They're coming from a long way back, like they were with CPUs. The main issue I see at the moment is, they're on 7 nanometers, Nvidia still on the previous node, and it seems like the efficiency and performance between the two is similar at the moment. But, by the time Nvidia gets around to moving to the latest node, they might even jump up to the, optimized 7 nanometer node straight up. AMD will have RDNA too. And, there'll be lots of interesting things going on there. I think because seems like they've got a bit of an injection of money to develop Navi from the console makers. Yep. That's going to have helped them a lot in developing these chips as well. So yeah, I think there certainly will be coming back in Nvidia, but there's lots of work to do, and like with the Ryzen, which just with the 3rd generation now is sort of right up near where Intel's performing at, it will probably as well take AMD a few generations to get back.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, Sharps97 says, would you guys ever be willing to test something like a motherboard with ALC 1220VB with... So he's basically... I'm just going to pause there for a minute. The whole thing is about, are we looking at doing motherboard audio quality testing versus discrete audio cards and stuff like that? Basically, audio quality testing. And no, audio's definitely not my thing. Not really your thing.
I'm one of those people where you can have pretty much a really crappy quality audio output or a really good one, and I probably can't tell the difference because I don't have good enough ears, or I just don't have good enough speakers or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I like good quality audio. I could definitely tell the difference between crappy audio, but I'm not an audio engineer, so it's just I'm not going to be able to make any kind of meaningful content on that, and I'm not passionate about it, so I'm not going to go out and learn and speak to all the experts I need to get good at it. So basically, I'd recommend for that kind of content, you go to whoever the experts are. Maybe, I mean, surely there's someone doing that kind of testing. But anyway, unfortunately, that's not the kind of testing you'll see from us. So, yeah, sorry, we won't be able to cater to any of the audio needs.
All right. With even more ray tracing games coming out just around the bend, could you guys start including global illumination in the benchmarks? Maybe they just mean ray tracing in general, because not all games use global illumination. But they said GI. Anyway, I know it wouldn't be fair to Radeon at this point since they have not released their global illumination tech yet, but Turing and Pascal have both been enabled, and I would love to see how they compare when running maximum settings. It seems silly to buy a GI/ray tracing enabled GPU and not use it unless the card cannot provide playable frame rates with it enabled. Digital Foundry's investigation into it was telling, but a little out of date at this point. I think our opinion on ray tracing is still pretty similar. It's just not really worth using at the moment. It's not really a killer feature or anything. It's very few games use it. The performance hit is still big and doesn't really provide a playable experience compared to the quality uplift.
In my opinion. Well, in my opinion, it's just not. I can't justify it.
Yeah, it's just
visually,
it's not
nearly spectacular enough.
Yeah, that's right. So, we will do more ray tracing benchmarking as more cards are released and more games are released, but I think for now we'll keep that as separate content because it's just not at the stage where it's mainstream enough that it's important for GPU comparisons. There's like 3 or 4 games.
Yeah,
maybe there's a few more now, but maybe 4 or 5 games, but there's just not enough. And I'm interested in the new Wolfenstein game, in how that will perform with ray tracing, simply because that's a game that runs at like 200 plus FPS easily on a lot of GPUs. You enable ray tracing, what's that going to perform like?
It's another annoying thing though. It's like, if you have an RTX 2080 Ti, just as an example, you've bought this really expensive high-end graphics card and you're pumped to play Wolfenstein and you want to play it with ray tracing. It's like, it's so pointless if it comes out. When is it meant to be patched?
I've got no idea.
Yeah, so if it's like Tomb Raider, it's just pointless. Who cares that game gets ray tracing because you've already played it?
Yeah, that is a big issue. The one thing that I find quite funny is that, like, how Nvidia made a big deal about ray tracing being, it just works. Well, it seems like every developer actually needs to work with Nvidia in depth for ages to get ray tracing working.
For it to just kind of work.
The only game that launched with it in a working state was Metro. Because Battlefield, it launched, but it wasn't very good, and it took like a couple of patches. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, you just mentioned, it took like, what was it, half a year to get integrated?
I think it was at least 6 months. And
then we've got Wolfenstein coming out, which is another big title, and it's not.
Well, Wolfenstein's out.
Yeah.
Like, I've already played it quite a bit.
Is it good? Worth playing?
Yeah, seems pretty good.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's a it just works thing, but it actually requires significant developer implementation.
It just works. You just have to spend over $1,000 on a high-end graphics card to semi-enjoy it. Then you also have to sit back, watch everyone else play the game. Don't play the game because that'll spoil the experience. We'll get the patch out 3 months later. Then you can have RTX on at 1080p.
I'm sure it will get better at some point, but it's just miles off at the moment.
Okay, next question. Do you think that AMD's FineWine and launch woes make less experienced consumers more hesitant to buy AMD products in general? Do you think AMD needs to cater more towards less experienced users as a result?
I wouldn't have thought so. Their CPUs are very popular as is.
Well, yeah, the Ryzen, they're actually having trouble getting 3rd gen Ryzen CPUs on shelves. So, nah.
All right, Revel Devil 2000 has a 2-part question, so I'll split this up into the 2 parts. How come I've only just now heard of image sharpening tools? I would feel image sharpening makes a lot more sense than a feature like DLSS when done properly. Are there major drawbacks for sharpening methods other than game supported and variance in quality? A small performance hit seems reasonable for a much sharper image, especially for 1080p gamers. I mean, it's a fairly complicated question. I think some of it comes down to the fact that games several years ago were pretty sharp as is. Like, there was no real issue with image sharpness from a game from 5 years ago. The problem is developers then started introducing like TAA or temporal anti-aliasing, and that made games look pretty soft and sometimes blurry, which, you know, and they wouldn't offer like an MSAA or super sampling anti-aliasing. So then, you know, Reshade comes along and starts offering sharpening, and, you know, now AMD's implementing in the drivers. So I think that's had a little bit of a reason to do with it. The other issue is the reason why we're starting to hear about features like DLSS is because 4K gaming is becoming more of a thing. You know, 4K displays are really cheap now. You can get them for like $300. So, you know, with 4K becoming more popular, they're kind of trying to come up with ways to make 4K viable.
And they're definitely not trying to come up with ways to justify having tensor cores.
Well, I think with the sharpening stuff, that's just...
Yeah.
I know DLSS, they came up with that as kind of a stupid way to justify the tensor cores, but not that Nvidia will ever tell us that. But I think, you know, with 4K being so intensive, though, they're trying to come up with ways to make that performance for that better, because the jump up from 1440p isn't that large, so you kind of think, oh, why bother? So they're trying to introduce things like resolution downsampling so that you can use 4K. So that's also a relatively new thing. And we've seen with, you know, consoles implementing stuff like checkerboard rendering and all that sort of thing, that we're just working through a whole bunch of different technologies to try and get these high resolution experiences to be a reality. So it's just kind of, that's the way these things come apart. We've tried a whole bunch of different stuff, and sharpening is the new thing that people are trying for that. The next part of the question was, how do you guys think Radeon image sharpening will affect next-gen consoles? Microsoft, Sony, and AMD are all touting that next gens will be utilizing Navi architecture, meaning they could potentially support Radeon image sharpening. I personally would love to see a performance option where the game is downscaled, then uses RS to sharpen the game back up. I think on consoles you won't see a performance option because they basically never offer performance options. I know the PS4 Pro has like a performance mode, but it really doesn't do all that much. So I think it will just be something that's enabled by default. They will just run the games at a lower resolution like they already do with checkerboard rendering, and then on top of checkerboard rendering they might use sharpening just to make the image look a bit better. I mean, you know, there's drawbacks, like if you sharpen the image too much, it looks kind of crap. You know, you get to a point where you start over sharpening it and then you lose detail and you lose quality. So, you know, there'll be a balance there, but I think it will definitely be used. I could imagine the only reason they implemented and developed a feature like graded image sharpening was for use on the consoles, and I imagine that's something that Microsoft and Sony both requested. So, yeah, interesting times, I think, for this sort of technology, especially because, you know, we've mentioned before how running a game below native resolution is something a lot of people don't do, even though you can get very similar image quality, especially at 4K. Like the slider, the 0.7 times 0.8 times setting, people just have ignored that. Whereas I think if we get more people realizing that gaming with those quality settings is perfectly viable and usable, then people get better experiences, and that's kind of what some of our game quality guides are for.
Yep.
Not just resolution downsampling, but not just running on ultra settings. You can often, like Resident Evil, remember that game? It looked almost identical on like the mid-tier settings compared to ultra.
Yeah.
It was pretty crazy. So yeah, all that stuff I think is interesting.
All right, that wraps up this Patreon exclusive that everyone can watch that isn't that exclusive. What do you reckon, Tim?
Yeah, I reckon we've got, again, good questions from the Patreon members and good answers from us.
Oh,
so we always do good answers, don't we?
Only the best.
Pat ourselves on the back for our effort there.
Yep.
Nice.
So because of that, you can hit the like button. You
Yeah,
can subscribe
definitely.
because you're not going to want to miss next month's Q&As.
Definitely not.
And that's it. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Steve. That's Tim. See you later.